here, if we think about, there's even somebody published a paper, I think it was in 2018, called the ontological theory of addiction, basically how the self is formed through this craving and clinging. And we can start to see how this fits together. If there's something pleasant, we want to hold on to it. We get a sense of that is what I like to do. There's the I starts to form. If something's unpleasant, we push it away. We start to get a sense for that's something I don't like to do. And then we start to form that identity around that. And every time we spin that wheel, that it was described as samsara, endless wandering, we spin that wheel and we reify a sense of self. We reify that story, and we build that block of the self. And the more solid it gets, let's think of a good analogy. So let's think of it this way. It takes a lot of energy. Have you all noticed that? Like, whether it's our social media account, whether it's our reputation, whatever it is, it takes a lot of energy to keep that self going, right? Because the world is constantly changing, and we've got to keep putting energy into keeping up with the world so that we can keep that stable sense of self going. Think of this like an ice cube. To make ice, if you live in a hot climate, you have to actually put water in a freezer, and you have to extract heat from the system. You have to put heat into the system to cool that ice cube, water down to make an ice cube. So if we think of the sense of self, we're putting all this energy in to make that cube. The more we solidify it, the more we're like, yes, that's ice cube. The more that is, we can think of that ice cube as me. But what naturally wants to happen is, through the laws of thermodynamics, if you put an ice cube at room temperature, it's going to melt. That energy is going to dissipate. It's going to become fluid. And here we can think of the self as, potentially naturally being a fluid state. And somebody had even mentioned this. I'm just looking at my notes. I can't find it. I can't read my handwriting, to be honest. If somebody had mentioned earlier, when I was asking you what's your concept of self, somebody mentioned, it sounded like it was more fluid, if I'm remembering that correctly. And so we might naturally be inclined, which is good news, to moving in this direction of fluidity, which means, some could interpret that as, awakening is our destiny as long as we get out of our own way, as long as we stop adding energy to the system to try to keep that ice cube cold. So why is it that we add energy to a system that is actually inherently painful? When I take an ego blow, it's painful. When I can't get something that I want, it's painful. When I get something that I don't want, it's painful. Well, if we look at these survival mechanisms, it may be that these wires got crossed a little bit, where when we go back to I'll just share the slide again so we can look at this together. When we go back to this Buddhist concept of dependent origination, and we look at pleasant and unpleasant leading to this craving, there's this natural tendency to hold on to things simply because this reinforcement learning system, the survival system, is still at play as the sense of self, as we started to need to think into the future, started to evolve. So, when we were hunter-gatherers, we didn't have to think as much about planting crops and then harvesting crops. It was just kind of like, today, let's go out and hunt and gather. But as agrarian society developed, we had to start to get a sense of time. Like, okay, we sow crops in the spring, we harvest them in the fall. And with that, started to evolve this sense of time, and the sense of me, I'm the one that planted, I can remember where the crops are. Okay, I got to remember where they are so I can harvest them. And the more we get caught up in this this phenomenon of wanting, especially it's like, ooh, somebody said something nice about me, or somebody liked my post on social media. The more that naturally drives the system, it sucks energy into the system based on these survival mechanisms. It's not like, oh yeah, I want to have an ego because it's painful. It's just something that kind of evolved along the way, not necessarily at this point as something that helps us, because we can see, that narcissism doesn't necessarily help us get along with people, but because it's kind of this, I think of it as it's like an appendix where it's, it's part of the system, but it's really not. Once we start to realize some of these greater rewards, it's something that just sticks around and kind of gets us in trouble.